years. The ILR School at Cornell University. ILR, shaping the next 75 years of work.
Hello, I am Jordan Berman, president of the ILR Alumni Association, and I am pleased to be your host and tour guide for the second night of Cornell Sports and Entertainment Week. We are here for the Careers in Streaming panel. It's really a Careers in Streaming spectacular because we have three of the finest Cornellians to graduate. I believe you all graduated. I haven't confirmed transcripts, but I've been told each of them graduated. And we've got Rob Landau, Bachelor of Science in ILR, and very much an overachiever, JD from Cornell in '92. He is currently the EVP of Business Operations at NBC Universal Media. Next, we have Meredith Gertler, who Bachelor of Science in '98. And Meredith, you're not an ILR, but we still like you. Where did you graduate from again? UMEC, right?
UMEC.
UMEC, go UMEC. And by the way, she is also a NYU Stern MBA grad where I graduated from. So you may notice that Meredith and I are bringing some extra intellect to the table tonight, given that. And Meredith currently serves as the EVP Content Strategy and Planning at HBO and HBO Max. And then last but certainly not least is Bharath Jayaraman, who is a MILR grad in 2009. He currently serves as director of HR business partner at Netflix. And Bharath absolutely is going to win the Panelist of the Night award because he is dialing in from India, where it is like 3 a.m. And word has it, there is no caffeine or other supplements in his body. Is that right, Bharath? Excellent. So we've got three amazing people. I want to thank you for joining this conversation. This is going to be lively. We're going to have fun. And we also want to make this really interactive. So the agenda tonight is I'm going to start with a little bit of context on the world of streaming, because I think when people say streaming, they could think of a lot of different things because it's really an evolving part of the media ecosystem. So I'm going to paint a little bit of background for like 2 minutes. Then we're going to dive right in. We're going to get to know each of our panelists. They're going to provide a little play-by-play on their career. And we're very much going to have a focus on, how they've shaped their careers, how they've navigated from Cornell to their career. And we're going to cover things like grad school. We're going to cover things like different experiences, functions they've worked in. But this is very much about, hey, how do you navigate a career in this sort of modern media environment? And then we're going to save about 20 minutes for questions. So do not be shy. I'd like everyone that has a question to enter it in the question area, the chat function, which I'll be keeping an eye on. And we'll make sure that we answer your questions. Also know that all three of our panelists and myself, we're all on this thing called LinkedIn. So if you want to follow up with any of us, definitely reach out to us on LinkedIn. It never hurts to say, you were awesome on that panel. I've got a question for you, because we definitely will answer those questions first. So without further ado, let me paint a little bit of a picture on this world of streaming. So first of all, I can't think of a bigger perfect storm for the explosion of video streaming services. You're talking about a pandemic. You're talking about the growth of 5G. You're talking about devices with large screens. You're talking about a new generation, Gen Z, consuming content really in every single device, and that goes for millennials and even some Gen Xers like me. But in essence, you've had all of the conditions have been ripe for the growth of video streaming. Now, what do I mean by video streaming? Obviously, a lot of us have cable TV subscriptions or subscriptions to satellite TV, DirecTV, Dish Network, or from our telco companies, whether it's AT&T or Verizon Fios, et cetera. But streaming is kind of a whole other animal. And really, you've seen that from the rise of Netflix, which pivoted from the distribution of DVDs. You had the rise of Hulu. You've had Amazon launching Prime as a value add to their Prime shipping service. And of course, you've got Apple TV, which is spending a ton of money to get in there. You've had HBO Max, which Meredith was very much involved with in launching and developing. You've had Disney Plus. I mean, maybe you've heard of a guy named Baby Yoda. So you've had a lot of exciting things. And of course, more recently, Peacock launched, which is part of the NBC Universal world. And then, of course, there are other services like Quibi. We'll see if that one survives. But there is really this intense focus in the media world on streaming video services. Now, Meredith and I both had a professor at Stern Business School a guy by the name of Scott Galloway. Scott is a fascinating provocateur, and he had a really fascinating article that he called Stream On. If you look him up, it's Professor Galloway, Prof. Galloway, GALLOWAY.com. And he had a really interesting metric when he was looking at these streaming companies. So he said there's, four key criteria. There's content. So which of these companies have, excellent content, a broad range of content, content that's excellent, and really you're seeing awards being won by almost all of these amazing streaming companies. And then you've got value in terms of, hey, what is the pricing and packaging? What are you getting for the money? And then the third piece is distribution, because some of these players actually own distribution. So if you're HBO Max, well, they're part of the AT&T ecosystem, and that also includes DirecTV, so they'll be able to push that through. If you're Apple, you've got Apple iPhones, etc. If you're a Netflix, if you're NBC, you're able to distribute content across many partners, including Roku and Xbox and Sony PlayStation. Really, wherever you can get content, you're finding these services. And then the fourth element of how you judge the success of a streaming service is kind of the flywheel, the business model. And you see some companies like Netflix, which was really first into the game with the subscription model. You see others like Amazon, where they bundle Prime television with the Prime shipping service. So in a sense, you could say Amazon is using streaming video to sell toilet paper. Although, quite frankly, I don't think you need anything but a pandemic to sell toilet paper these days. And then what's interesting is you've got folks like Disney. When they're selling Disney Plus, they're also trying to sell you the Chewbacca doll. They're trying to sell you the theme park experience. And then, of course, same with Apple. They're trying to sell iPhones. So there's some really interesting business models in terms of ad-supported, in terms of premium subscription, commercial-free. And then, of course, you're also seeing live video services like Hulu Live TV or YouTube TV. So there's a lot of different things happening. But the last thing I want to share is that when you think about the importance of streaming and all of the attention it's getting, first of all, just watch any television program or really marketing anywhere, and you will see ads from Netflix, you'll see ads from HBO Max, you'll see ads from Peacock, you'll see ads from YouTube Live. It's a big deal. And when you look at what happened with Disney's stock, their stock rose 9% the week of the launch of Disney Plus. They gained $21 billion in value. So clearly, when companies are making plays in streaming, people are listening and watching. And I think the other thing to think about is there are some companies that have approached streaming video from a creative perspective. So I think of the NBCUs, I think of the HBOs. And then you've got other folks like Netflix that might have originated really with more of a technology proposition, but are bringing in that creative element. So there are a lot of ways to sort of judge, what each of the players are doing. But the only thing I think we'll agree on is this is an exciting place to be. And so with that, what I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce each of our speakers, and we're going to get into the ins and outs of their careers and some advice they have for Cornelians. And what I'd like to do is I'm going to ask each speaker to give, well, first of all, they've got to tell us what their favorite show they're streaming right now. And then the second thing is I want them to give a real short play-by-play. So I'm going to give you an example. So, of course, with my three guests here, I've got to say I love watching Parks and Recreation on NBCU. I love Raised by Wolves on HBO Max. And I really love The Playbook, which is this amazing series on Netflix with coaches and their philosophies, including the 76ers' Doc Rivers, who is one of my favorites. My career, I graduated from the ILR school. I worked for Black & Decker in sales and marketing. I moved into the advertising agency business. Then from there, I joined the entertainment world. I worked for Showtime for 6 years in online marketing and promotions, did my MBA at night. And then I joined Singular, which became AT&T, in helping launch mobile video. From there, I joined MTV. I was running integrated marketing. And then I said goodbye to the corporate world. I'm going to launch my own video production studio and creative agency, and that is called OFC. And that's where I'm at right now. So, Rob Landau, you got big shoes to fill after that introduction. Tell us, what are you streaming right now? And give us a little play-by-play on your career. How'd you get to be where you are?
Thanks. And so I, as Jordan mentioned, I am both a Cornell and then NBC came a calling back in 1999, and It was a much smaller company then. So NBC was really just the network itself. It wasn't cable. It wasn't Universal. It wasn't Parks. I moved back 20 years ago and started as a lawyer for the company. And subsequently, over the years, my job evolved and I became involved with the Olympics and took on more operational roles as my career changed. So I've been in the sports division now for about 14 years of my career at NBC. And over the recent years, I've developed more oversight over some of the areas of HR, IT, operations, facility, studio remote operations and production. So a lot of different areas as I've hung around long enough. And it's been a great ride. As to what I'm doing these days, you can imagine with TV sports production in limbo with COVID, there's been a lot of efforts to keep us going on air. So that's been where most of my time has been spent the last 6 months. As to what I'm streaming now, I'll be a homer and I'll say right now I'm streaming a show called Yellowstone on Peacock, which has been terrific. It's with Kevin Costner. I'll give a little bit of shout out to Bharath that I've gone retro and started watching Old West Wing. If that dates me, it's okay, but it's all about politics and elections. And for those who want to see life repeating itself, you may want to take a look at West Wing and look at it through the lens of what's going on today. And as far as for Meredith, I'll give her a shout out to HBO. It's my all-time favorite, Curb Your Enthusiasm. One of my favorite shows of all time. So that's where I spend my time, and obviously a lot of fun stuff to dig into today.
And by the way, the one thing Rob forgot to say, probably the most important thing about him, is he has the best collection of like NBC Universal swag that you've ever seen. So this guy, I mean, even look what he's wearing. I mean, if you want to know why you should work in streaming, you get the polo shirts, you get the zip ups. There, you could basically outfit a closet. Am I right, Rob?
Yes, it's better to look good than to feel good. That's my motto. So we dress for success in NBC Sports.
Well done. Well, speaking of success, I have to go to Meredith Gertler. So Meredith, what are you streaming right now? And give us a little bit of a play-by-play with your career, because I was privileged enough to see you, to meet you actually at Stern at NYU. I didn't even meet you at Cornell. Not that I recall. There was a lot of, late night things happening. But Meredith, what are you streaming? And give us a little play-by-play on your background.
All right, so I'm streaming, obviously, plug HBO Max, and you already did, Jordan, Raised by Wolves, which by genre, but I'm really into it, so I highly recommend. Below Deck, so that's a shout out to Rob's company. I'm a big Bravo junkie. I need my lean back viewing just as much as I need my lean in. And on Netflix, I'll give a shout out to Netflix. I'm watching Cobra Kai. It's like the nostalgia in me.
Yes.
So a quick play-by-play. I graduated from Cornell in 1998. I was in the HUMEC school. I graduated with a degree in Human Development and Family Studies. But my first job upon graduation was working at an ad agency in Manhattan. So I worked at a large ad agency for a few years doing account management. While I was working there, it was at the height of the internet boom. The bubble hadn't yet burst, and I had been working on interactive advertising. So I jumped to go to a .com, just like everyone else was back in those days, like the lure of stock options, and we're all going to be really rich. And about 9 months after I made the move, our company lost our second round of funding, and we were all on the street with our pink slips. So it was at that time that I just started to think about what do I want to do next? And I loved entertainment. I'm a huge consumer of entertainment. My brother's a film producer. We grew up, our activity together was going to movies. It'd be kind of fun to work in the movies. I don't know exactly what. So it was at a time where the job market was terrible, pounding the pavement, trying to get my foot in the door anywhere. Finally, there was an assistant position open at Miramax Films in the publicity department. So I basically, to get that foot in the door, took a 50% pay cut and started out on the ground floor assisting one of the head publicists for Miramax. Spent 2 years working there. But during that time, I kind of quickly knew that publicity wasn't necessarily my calling. I really wanted to get back into more of an advertising and marketing function. But then I'd taken this huge step back in my career. So it was like, how do I pivot? And I don't know, I can't even remember how I decided that business school might be a good move to, take myself out of the job market for 2 years, go to the full-time program, reset. NYU had a media and entertainment track as part of their MBA program. So I kind of put all my eggs in one basket, applied, fortunately got in, and really went there to focus on rounding out my business knowledge, taking a lot of finance classes, and ultimately graduated with a specialty in marketing and finance, knowing the entire time I wanted to stay in entertainment. Jordan, as he knows, was pivotal in me finding my first job out of NYU, which was at HBO, and I'm still at HBO. So all credit goes to Jordan. He helped connect me with a few folks there. So my first job after graduating from NYU was working in the HBO home entertainment division as a marketing manager. So full P&L responsibility in overseeing the releases of HBO original programming on DVD. So taking shows like Sex and the City and Entourage, releasing them on DVD, figuring out what the packaging is going to look like, how we're going to price it, how we're going to sell it, how we're going to market it. So really the perfect post-MBA job in entertainment for someone like me who's interested in marketing. So I worked in home entertainment for a few years, moved to London for a year to oversee our international home entertainment business. And then about 8 years ago, God, I'm old, I transitioned into a more of a role at HBO. So helping to inject more strategy in terms of how we were programming and scheduling the HBO linear networks. We had also launched HBO Go about a couple years before that. I also helped launch HBO Now, which was our OTT service in 2015. And then with the merger with AT&T and establishing HBO Max, I've taken on this role of overseeing content strategy and planning for both HBO and HBO Max, which are very tightly connected. So really helping to establish overall content needs. So what sort of content do we need across various audience segments? Devising rollout strategies for our original programming. So establishing when and how we want to roll out our programming, overseeing the scheduling of all of our platforms. So that includes all of HBO platforms, including the linear networks, and then of course, HBO Max. And just acting as an overall conduit between marketing and other key stakeholders across Warner Media. So that's that.
You know, Meredith, I should have made a deal where I became your agent, and then for every year you stayed at HBO, maybe I get a kickback, and I'd be a rich man because you've been kicking butt there. That's awesome. That is quite the journey. All right, we got our man Bharath Jayaraman, who again live from India. Bharath, you're at a little company called Netflix. I've heard of you guys. You're somewhat of a player in the streaming world, but talk to me. First of all, what are you watching? And then you've got a really fascinating background because you actually studied engineering as an undergrad, right? So, but first, tell me, what are you watching? And then talk to me how a former engineer kind of ended up at the ILR school for an MILR and then at Netflix.
Yeah, sure. What am I watching right now? Well, I just finished Penny. Once I got past episode 2, I was like, I just can't stop watching. And then, as far as NBC is concerned, Rob, I just got to say, I was so bummed when Netflix stopped streaming Friends because the license ran out. So now I am this close to actually getting a Peacock subscription just so I can watch Friends over again. I'm one of those crazy people. I can quote every line of every episode of all 10 seasons. I grew up on Friends. That's me. Judge me all you want, but that's me. So I just love that. And I finished watching Emily in Paris, and on Netflix, which was okay, to be honest. And then The Haunting of Bly Manor in Netflix again. It's a good show. Just that's what I watched.
Nice.
So I have a bit of a very different career track from both Meredith and Rob because I've sort of followed HR career paths, especially at tech companies. And then I remember when Jordan, you reached out and asked me to join the panel, I said, well, it's just completely incidental that I'm at Netflix right now, but it's not really a streaming sort of or an entertainment background. That's not what it is. And then you reminded me, thank you, which that there is sort of a connecting theme here because Amazon is known for a lot of things, but then I was at Amazon, and then they have something to do with entertainment as well, and then so does Facebook with content watching, and then especially with original content producers around the world and everything that Facebook is doing around the world. So, quick sort of 30-second on my background, like I said, I have a career in engineering. I don't know whether there's a good answer to how does someone who has an engineering background end up doing what I do. I think the only way is I knew I was not going to be a good engineer. That was very obvious even before I graduated. So that's easy. Then the question is, what do I want to do? I just got lucky. My first job out of college was Google had just opened up an office in India, their first ad operations office. And this was 2002. So they were still defining the world of cost per click advertising, which is pretty much staple and standard today. But Google was defining it back then, and this was a fun job where you were reviewing ads for this great company, and it was 2 years before Google went public. So I got lucky because it was a time in Google's growth where you could just raise your hands and say I want to do that, and they'd say okay. No one would ask you whether you have a background for it, whether you're qualified to do it. They would just say, okay. So it was great. And then over the next three and Google, I ended up being part of a team that was just responsible for bootstrapping and opening up new offices for Google around the world. So I spent 6 months living in Dublin, 7 months in Shanghai, 8 months in Romania. And that was just fun for a 21, 22-year-old to do all of that and all that traveling. It was pretty fun. And that's what got me interested in HR, because I realized that things like organization structures matter and the role of managers matters and things like that. And that's what got me to Cornell. So then it was the MyLR program, 2007 through 9. And then Amazon for almost 6 years, which was another bit of a whirlwind because I was in Lexington, Kentucky in a warehouse for a year, and then I was in Seattle for a couple of years on and off. I was in London and Luxembourg helping with the ad tech business launch and growth, and that was quite fun. And then I was at Facebook for 3 years out of Singapore, and I was leading HR for India and Southeast Asia. And then I came back to the US, to New York, to run HR for a 35% small fintech startup called Paxos in the blockchain. They had a very cool product in the blockchain space. And over 2 years, we grew that company from 35 to about 300. They got acquired, which is a good event, good exit for everybody involved in the company. And then I went to work for a company called Jewel, which I probably need a whole other hour to talk about it. It's a whole other story. Good learning, lots of ups, lots of downs. And then about 3 months ago, I joined Netflix. And my current role, I lead the HR team for the engineering organization at Netflix, which is about 3,000 employees.
Nice. So I got to tell you, I'm hearing all of these international sort of moves and roles. Rob, obviously very involved with the Olympics. For the record, I did once work in Columbus, Ohio, so I kind of feel I'm a little bit exotic as well as the rest of these panelists, maybe not as much. So a couple of things here. It seems like you have each taken very different routes to get into the entertainment business. I guess one question is, in this world of streaming, I mean, is that the case that there are so many different ways into a career in this space? There's not just one, because I think a lot of people think, oh, if I want to get in streaming or sports or something else, there's like one pathway. I mean, Rob, you're nodding your head. I mean, am I correct that there's a lot of different ways in? It's not just one prototype career?
Yeah, I mean, that is, streaming is like any other business. It has a variety of different facets and areas of entry if you want to start a career. For people who graduate ILR, is there's sometimes this focus on what you've learned in ILR as being the guide towards what you need to go do in your career. And obviously that, at least in my case, proved true early on in my career. ILR, but it hasn't really shaped the last 10 years of the responsibilities I've taken on. So, I think the important lesson I would share is, be nimble, in your mindset as to what you take on, and as Meredith and I spoke about last time, is never say no to work and opportunities to learn new stuff. I certainly didn't know anything about some of the areas that I oversee today, and the most important lesson there is around knowing how to find people who you manage who do. You're not going to be the expert on all fields, and what sort of differentiates people in all of our companies who survive and stay long in careers are those who can adapt and take on more, even though they might not be experts right out of the gates. So that's what I've learned from it. I don't know if Meredith or Bharath have different perspectives.
Yeah, Meredith, what's your thought? I mean, especially for someone, you've had a number of different roles in the entertainment business, whereas Rob, I mean, really has been at NBC Universal for a while. Bharath, really, Netflix being a core entertainment company, obviously Facebook and Amazon have. But Meredith, were you like sort of at HUMEC going, oh, I'm going to be a movie mogul, I'm going to be in entertainment? Was that happening while you were like grabbing a slice of pizza at College Town Pizza one day?
Definitely not. I had applied to Cornell to be in HUMEC because I thought I wanted to be a school psychologist. So I was at HDFS, Human Development and Family Studies major. And for the first 3 years, basically, I was really laser focused on courses in that area. And it wasn't until I studied abroad the second semester of my junior year in London. And it was a program actually through Boston University. It wasn't through Cornell because it was an internship program. So I didn't really even need to take courses. I had to take one class. But then I worked at a nonprofit, but lived with like 12 other women from other universities who most of them had internships in marketing and advertising. And they would come back from their days and I would come back from my days, and their days sounded way more interesting than what I was doing. So I made the decision when I got back for my senior year that, you know what, before I commit myself to like a PhD program and spend the next 5 years at, trying to get my PhD or a PsyD, why don't I try something different, take some classes in other areas like marketing. And I took essentially a marketing 101 class. I think it was in the ag school at the time, and I loved it. And that was really just what caused me to pivot to at least say, hey, let me try something different before I took my GRE. Is it the GRE? In case I wanted to go back to get my PhD. But that kind of just catapulted me in a different direction. Really loved marketing and got some advice from a family friend who spent decades in the advertising business saying, you know what, working at an ad agency was a great starting point. And it really was actually. And I kind of just went from there.
Yeah. And Bharath, I mean, you kind of said it yourself. You really were on this HR path that brought you to a number of really big name tech companies, and then ending at Netflix. But in the back of your head, were you thinking, man, it'd be really cool? Like when you got that call from Netflix, and I don't know if you called them or they called you, but was it a very intentional thought? Hey, I want to get into this space, or was it really Netflix being a unique company?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It certainly was about having worked for the kind of companies I have. Who's out there who's doing things in a way that has never been done before? I mean, that was the lens. It is very incidental that happens to be in the entertainment and the media space, but it's definitely that order, not the other way around. So, I mean, back to your question, that's the one thing I would say. I think if I look back at my career, the one thing that helped me was if you work for a company that, I mean, there isn't really a company that does everything well. But then if you work for a company that is known for doing 2 or 3 things the best way there is, that's something to actually aspire for, because you want to be working for companies that actually are so good at something that they set the benchmark. So I'll give you an example right now. At Netflix now, one of the big bets we're making is, animation, obviously, and everybody is thinking about that. And we want to hire good animation talent. You'd think we'd want to go to Disney, Pixar, and some of the big names like that. Actually, the gaming companies are the ones where we find the best talent in terms of engineering, right? Like, and people who do great, because that's really where it's hard to find the good people who do that kind of work. So when you think about your career, if you work for a company where you're excited about it because they do something so well, and then you build on that track record, that makes more. I mean, that's in the long run, that pays off way more.
So 3 very different pathways. One question. I'll be kind of grabbing questions and inserting it in the conversation. But Isabel just asked a question. She's class of 2020. God bless you and protect you. But Isabel, her question seems to be, how do you get that first foot in the door, especially in entertainment where, it's hard to kind of do a summer job in the entertainment business, right? It's easy to get a job at the swim club or, at a camp or whatever. But that first experience, and I faced this myself when I was interviewing with Showtime, like, what entertainment experience do you have? And I really had to tell a story about working for an ad agency on a video game client and sort of positioning that as being in the entertainment biz. So let me ask you guys, did you face that, like, hey, the first time you got an entertainment job, and maybe Meredith, we can start with you, because I think you said one of your first entertainment jobs was Miramax?
Yeah.
How do you get that first job when they often say, well, have you been in entertainment before?
Well, I will say in my experience, if for like true entry level positions, it's not necessarily about having entertainment experience. But it probably varies like from function to function, and company to company. But if you're willing to sort of really start at the ground level and as someone's assistant, which is what I did, it's kind of less about maybe some people might really care, but I know for my, like when I hire entry level people, I care less about their actual experience, but do I think they're capable of doing the tasks required of them, which just takes brains and good judgment and being flexible and adaptable and all of those things. So I think it's really just kind of focusing on conveying those skills that you have versus necessarily whether or not you had an internship or not at an entertainment company. I would encourage you, if you're not, haven't graduated yet and you know entertainment is an area that you want to focus, there are internships, I feel like, everywhere during the year, and especially now in a remote work environment. Like, I think HBO and Warner Media are going to be hiring interns to work remotely. So it's trying to like throw your hat in the ring for those opportunities to build some experience, but I don't think it's necessarily necessary.
Yeah, and my question, I'd be curious to hear Rob on this. Yes, there are formal internships, but I've been impressed when I see students that have done volunteer stuff or they've done a student club and they've organized something around a passion so that they don't just say, hey, I love sports, I'd like to work for NBC Sports, for example. I mean, Rob, what you've had your hand on HR as well as operations. What's your advice for people that want to get into an NBC Universal?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to approach it beyond just a desire to get into entertainment or sports. And as I said earlier, you have to view it in the way of business. So Meredith said, she had an interest in marketing. How do you develop that interest? How do you demonstrate that interest and then convert that into a possible internship or early career opportunity? She's right. There's lots of virtual opportunities that otherwise were unavailable to Cornellians during spring and fall right now. We've had a smaller internship program, but they're virtual. So it matters less that you have to be in a particular major city or area where the work is being done. I think also, you have to combine a little bit about, networking a little bit in advance, as well as combining that to doing some of the blocking and tackling to go apply, physically applying online. When I was much younger and interested in sports and trying to break into the sports industry many years ago at Cornell, I did the old-fashioned writing letters to every sport entity imaginable out of a green book that had all the addresses. And there was a bar in Cornell called Dunbar's, it's no longer there now, that used to honor, a pitcher of beer for 5 rejection letters. And I drank pretty well for my junior year, looking for
legally, let's add that.
Yeah, junior year. So in any event, what I'm trying to say is it does require a lot of effort. Like, I would treat, that, seriously and spend a lot of time applying and accepting rejection and getting through that, using networking. I will tell you, anecdotally, there's never been a Cornellian that I've known that wouldn't take a call or wouldn't answer an email. Whether they can guide you to the next job is a separate question, but they're there to guide, and nothing's more proud than a Cornell alum trying to help out a Cornell undergrad find their first job. But I wouldn't just leave it at, I want to break into the sports and entertainment industry. I think you got to narrow your focus a little more and make the pitch as to what you want to do to help a business, whether it be marketing, sales, programming, whatever that might be. Pick an area. It doesn't have to be the area for life. It has to just have something where you could speak to get you focused on how you might be able to help or be of value to a company.
Yeah, because Bharath, I mean, I imagine if someone meets you at a cocktail party or maybe a virtual happy hour these days and says, oh, I love Stranger Things. I'd love to work at Netflix because I imagine I'm just watching Stranger Things all day. How do you kind of channel that enthusiasm for the product into, hey, is this a good match? Especially with the culture. I mean, Netflix is obviously pretty renowned with the whole culture book and really kind of finding the right match, as obviously all these companies are represented, but I think Netflix especially so. Talk about that, Bharath.
Yeah, I think, I want to echo what Rob said. I think you've got to really, the enthusiasm is a great place to start, but then you've really got to go like 5 levels below that to ask yourself, what is it about that product that actually, makes you and gets you so excited. So, I mean, if you were able to start with the conversation of, I love Stranger Things, but then, hey, I noticed that there is a pattern in which, you guys make these shows, and here's the connective tissue, and this is awesome, and, I love a company that actually thinks this way, and asking, and then that turns into a conversation about help me understand how you think about content. I mean, you really want to be, if a conversation about enthusiasm for a product, over time sort of changes into I'm asking you questions so show you how interested I am, and then you narrow it down to saying I want to work in this area in this company because I think here is the sort of correlation between what I told you about what I'm excited about and really why I think you guys would be something that a company that I want to work for. That
Yeah.
actually becomes, it leaves a mark, it leaves an impression, and then you can build on that.
Well, and what's interesting is this whole space of streaming is evolving, right? Even in terms of the relationship between streaming and the theatrical film experience. There was actually a question, I believe it was from Matt, who actually asked a question about, hey, what's the thought around like Disney Plus releasing Mulan, or how Tenet was launched? But two of you are from organizations that have feature film studios in terms of Warner Brothers being part of the kind of AT&T HBO world, and then of course Universal Pictures within NBC Universal. Obviously Netflix, am I correct? Bharath has actually released films theatrically. I'm trying to recall that.
Well, we did a direct to consumer on Trolls a couple of months ago that was very successful. It was our first toe in the water on releasing directly, and we had a lot of success with it. I think you have to be choosy as to what kind of film you do that for. Some films lend themselves to that. Some films, as you've seen or heard, are holding off on release because they think the better value would be waiting to get those out into the major markets in the normal, or I should say, historical viewership approaches. We don't know what's going to happen in the movie industry in that regard, and how we're learning as we all are all learning together how this is shifting. But one thing I do know is, if you make great content, people will find it and people will pay for it. So it's just a question of, how that gets, funneled through the systems as we go. And I think that's for all three of our companies at the core of our success or failure is going to be how great content be developed with all of our partners.
Yeah, because there's a question somewhat related. Eitan Wolf had, if I hope I'm pronouncing his name properly, had a question that said, when you had cable or you had satellite, you get these big bundles, right? And maybe I don't watch that much ESPN, but I'm still paying $5 on my bill that goes to it. So the idea was, well, I'll buy these streaming channels or services, and I'll get just what I want. And his question was, especially from a marketing standpoint, and it sounds like, Meredith, this may be more of your kind of sweet spot. The question is, hey, are we going back to a world where you have to now aggregate your own sort of large bundle? Is it like confusing? Wait, is The Office, is it on Peacock, or wait, is it still on Netflix? And cobble together, like Meredith, what's the challenge there in terms of like an HBO Max or the industry where you have to communicate that, hey, even if you have Netflix or Peacock, you're still going to want to watch everything on HBO Max?
Yeah, I mean, there is sort of like a rebundling that'll be happening, and people creating their own bundles. I mean, I think the research shows that right now the threshold is like 3 to 5 paid services. That's what paid streaming services. And then of course there's the free streaming platforms, ad supported, that'll sort of like supplement, I think, people's portfolio, whatever they're subscribing to, whatever they're watching. But it is like, the HBO Max, it's the notion of, well, it's not just HBO, it's a lot of these other brands and this other content from within the Warner Media ecosystem and third parties. So it's almost like we're establishing our own bundle, HBO plus Max, with the goal of having content across ages and demographics. So we're providing more value for the entire household, so that we're part of that consideration set when you're thinking about what are like the 3 to 5 services that I have a threshold in terms of subscribing. So that's our goal.
Yeah, and I guess on top of that, you also have the audio services like the Spotify's or Apple Music, et cetera. So let me ask a question, this is sort of a question by Woody, and I think it's really to everybody. But Bharath, let's start with you. This question is, no one knows exactly where the industry is going, right? Because obviously there's a technology component, there's a what are consumers adopting. But in terms of like where we think the career opportunities are going to be, could you guys talk a little bit about that? And maybe it's different functions that are growing, maybe it's different areas of focus, because I think ultimately the folks attending want to get a sense of, hey, where should I start to orientate myself if I want to get into this world? Where will the big opportunities be? So Bharath, what's your thought there?
Yeah, I'm going to suggest something which really is my opinion. I think this is a big, based on the trends that we've been seeing, at least for the last 1 year. I think this might be where we're going, but we'll see what happens. So don't hold me to it. When you think about entertainment companies, there is obviously the tech component. How do you actually, produce all of this but consume it at scale? And then there is obviously the content part of it, which is huge. How do you tell a story and all of that? So those two will continue to grow. So that's default. But outside of that, there is this connective tissue between the two of them, which is how do you help your audience find content that they want, that they know they love, and then how do you know whether they're enjoying it? So any work that actually, because that is the part that actually bridges those two. So any work that whether it's technical or not, any kind of job or opportunity that has to do with finding out how do people consume information, how do you know whether they like it or not, and what's the best way for them to actually consume that information, anything in that space will continue to grow. That's my opinion.
Interesting. Meredith, I see you nodding your head. Are there specific areas where you say, man, the world is really going to need this type of skill?
Yeah. Well, I think with all these streaming services, like the beauty, for a company like HBO is having the Holy Grail is now having access to first party data that we didn't have before. So kind of echoing and expanding what Bharath was talking about is data science and content analytics and the all the work behind what are people watching, how are they watching, to help fuel content decisions. That is I feel like that's just continuing to grow. That's something that Netflix has been doing for several years. And then the new entrants now are building. So I think anything in the area of data science and analytics. And then I think the notion around what is the curated experience like, so the product experience, how content is being surfaced, like Ralph said, how are we helping viewers find the content that they love and also to surprise and delight them. But then I do think just like all the other traditional functional areas like marketing, but really growth marketing, how are you growing your subscriber base, some more of that, having that direct connection to the customer. So areas in that marketing in those areas like growth and social. And
yeah, and I assume what trumps all of that is the real growth is finding crazy people who have tiger zoos in their backyard that they can monetize, hopefully without going to jail for attempted murder. Would you agree, Bharath? Rob,
Yeah.
Hey, if you haven't watched Tiger King yet, you're letting some of life's best moments.
I have watched it, and it's amazing to me what people gravitate to. I don't know if you've watched over the last couple of days, but a gentleman did a TikTok video to the tune of Fleetwood Mac that apparently went viral, and he's been on all the news circuits for the last week, and he's making new videos, and that's sort of the world we live in. That's the content that we're competing with. Fragmented audiences, people who consume content by the drop. As I joke all the time, my children sort of balance me, but getting my son to watch a football game like I used to watch with my father is no longer realistic. And so, how do we sort of deal with that? I think Meredith hit on a very important point answering your question as to how data plays a role in this. This has really been, for all of our companies, a gold mine of how we're able to figure out what makes people come to watch, what keeps them, and the like. So, Peacock is the newest addition in this group. We took a different approach. We have an advertising supported model to start as we build subscribers, and have done so pretty well. We had hoped we were going to be able to launch it in conjunction with the Olympics for Tokyo, which got postponed into 2021. But it has had a really successful start. But one thing that I've marveled at is just how we're able to figure out very quickly what people are watching, why they watch it, what drives consumers, and it makes us all smarter. And I think, going back to your question, areas where people are able to get into analytics and interpret data is really important on top of what historical functions are. I mean, make no mistake, production and programming drive budgets in all of our companies. That's at the core. That's where most of the jobs are, because it's most expensive to put that together. But I would say the most sustainable jobs, the jobs that you could take from company to company, are the ones that are really gold, especially if you love what you do. I mean, I've been blessed that over the last 14 years, I love what I do. The key for any of this is to, dabble when you're young, but ultimately settle in on something where you enjoy waking up and doing that. And if you do that, you're in a good place as your career develops.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me, that mixture of sort of art and science, where, again, I mean, take any of these series that have kind of exploded into pop culture on all of your services. They say, like Seinfeld, actually Seinfeld tested really poorly, and then the NBC moved it forward and it became a monster hit. So this idea
there's a book about American Idol, how all the major networks passed on American Idol until Fox got it, and talks about how we all said, who would ever want to listen to people who don't know how to sing? And the story told itself. So yeah, sometimes you never know.
Yeah, Bharath, you were going to say
that Friends was about to be canceled. I think I've been 5-6 episodes into the first season. I don't know whether it's true, but I mean, for whatever reason, I'm glad they aren't, because let me be honest about this. I grew up in India and I came to the States when I was 27 years old, and for whatever reason, my only pop culture reference for America coming to the US at 27 years age as a fully grown adult was Friends. And well, there are some hits and misses there, but I'm glad I had it. So for whatever reason.
Nice. I'll tell you in on a little secret. HBO Max is streaming Friends. Just FYI,
yes.
Peacock.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So just so you know, they got Friends and we got The Office back. So we get The Office back.
And you know what I love about, if there's any takeaway from this panel, is we can all get along. If this is a parable for the greater, United States of America and the global world, we can get along, even if we're at different companies. There's one thing, obviously, that's sort of a similar DNA throughout all your paths, even though your paths are so unique. You all went to graduate school. You're a bunch of overachieving Cornellians. So what I want to do is I want to ask each of you, what's your advice today to a student that says, I'm thinking of dropping a couple $100,000 into grad school. Rob, you went to law school. Bharath, you got your master's in ILR. Meredith and I both got our MBAs at NYU. So let's start. Meredith, let's start with you. This investment in an MBA, you went full-time. I went part-time, by the way. So I was working at Showtime. But talk to me, do you feel you got the investment out of it? And I know it's a very personal question about, involving finances and stuff, but what's your advice to a young person who's thinking about going to business school?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not an easy decision. And I would say everyone's circumstances and situation is different. I think the driver for me was I was not in a job where going part-time was an option. So the company would not have subsidized it. I would not have been able to leave work to go to class for a 6 p.m. class. So if it was something that I wanted to do, I really needed to take myself out of the job market and go full time. But I also really needed something to sort of give my career a swift kick in the ass and really sort of pivot back into a more of a traditional marketing job in entertainment that I believed, based on people I talked to, that I would be able to do more quickly just going through the 2-year program at business school versus, I'd taken a step back in my career to become an assistant in PR and then to sort of just on a practical basis, make that move within a company. It wasn't the right move. So the right move for me was to take out loans that I'm still paying off and go to business school. But it's paid off in spades. I mean, it was the best decision I ever made in my career, just in terms of the program and my laser focused on wanting to stay in entertainment. So I took internships in entertainment and networked with the right people like Jordan. And it helped really prepare me for my first job at HBO.
And what's interesting is you went to grad school, and which is typical for business school, a number of years after you graduated. Whereas Rob, I mean, the classic ILR overachiever did a law degree and right? You did like this combined program, Rob? What was that?
No. I stayed the full tilt through 3 years. You gave me a lot more credit than I deserved in graduating law school in one year, but it was I stayed up right out of undergrad and graduated 3 years later from law school. So I was in Cornell for the full tilt.
And Rob, hold on, let me just interrupt you here. And you knew that the weather was going to still be the same. It's not like global warming was going to make it a paradise,
I did not think it might be the answer of why I wound up moving to California, a couple of months after graduation. But I stepped into it a little bit on that.
So the law degree, you decided to go to law school, actually, clearly your senior year, right? Because that's when you applied as an undergrad, and then you went the next year after you graduated?
Yeah, I mean, I think you knew where you were going generally. You apply, but depending on when you find out. But
yeah.
I had a general inkling that I might want to practice law, and I guess that goes to the question that you're asking. I will give it the story a little bit in the sense of I wasn't sure, but I had some inkling that I might want to be a lawyer. And I would say even having gone to law school, it actually put more doubt in my mind of whether or not I want to do it. The good news is when I actually went to go practice law, I actually enjoyed it a lot. And I liked being in a law firm, and it was a very positive experience. I wasn't certain when I was going through law school whether I was going to like it. What I tell all who ask is, tread lightly on that. Don't tread lightly on that decision. It's an important decision. Take the time. You don't have to rush to law school. Some people say, do you need it to get to whatever career aspirations you have down the road? My answer to that to everyone is, unless you want to practice law and, derive some of the skills from practicing law to help you along the way in your career, then it's a tough bet to make to go to law school without a desire to go use what you learned in law school to be a lawyer. I wouldn't be where I am today without having been a lawyer. But if I didn't have the directional that I was going to go practice law, but I was just going to go get a degree, that would have been a tougher bet. A lot of companies, including NBC, aren't just hiring people just out of law school. And so they expect that you go learn the craft. And if you don't have the stomach to go do that for 4 or 5 years at least, it makes it harder.
Yeah, there's
also very expensive, as we know, a very expensive proposition. Meredith's approach and the approach with business school, I like a lot better. Just as a model, it sort of gets people into the business world and firms up some of their career pathing a little bit. And I think it makes them for better students. That's not to say that some of the smartest people in law school and best lawyers out there didn't go straight through. I just think from an overall education standpoint, sometimes it's helpful to take a break.
Yeah, I want to serve this up to Bharath. I hear a lot of students or recent grads say, I might just go to grad school. It couldn't hurt. And yet the fact of the matter is it's a huge investment. It's a big investment time. It's a big energy and emotional investment. In fact, when I went to NYU Stern at night, Showtime was paying for it. I was at Showtime at the time. And that mentally was tough to go from class to work. And it took me 3 years. But Bharath, I mean, you're an ILRE who chose to go there as an adult. I like to say I went when I was a 17-year-old kid, knew nothing. So for you to choose ILR as an adult, as an experienced adult, you must really love ILR. What was the math you did in choosing to get your MILR?
Yeah. One, I just want to say that, yes, actually it could hurt if there isn't a lot, like Rob said, if you haven't put a lot of thought into it, it's a decision you shouldn't take lightly. It could hurt. I mean, like I said, it's expensive, and you could easily be in a situation where you just do it because you think it's an option and you just want to do it. And then 3 years later, you realize that that's really not what you want to do, or you don't like it at all. So my story is, at home, my parents have been putting a lot of pressure on me to go to grad school from the day I graduated my undergrad. Because typical Indian household, if I don't have a master's degree 1 year after I finish college, I'm useless because my brother has 2 master's degrees from 2 Ivy League schools, and I'll never hear the end of that story. So, that's how, so I've thought about this a lot, but I'm glad that I worked for about 4 years before I applied to the Cornell program. And to be honest, I can't honestly say that I did that because I was smarter and I knew better. Like I said, there was a lot of pressure, and I felt like, oh my God, I have to get into grad school as soon as possible. But for whatever reason, the job that I had offered me so many opportunities. Like I said, joining a company like Google at that stage and getting an opportunity to just go live in these cities around the world and open up offices, it's great. And then when I look back, there was a point at which the application sort of wrote itself. And that's probably the best way. That would be my advice for people to think about grad school. Definitely start working for a few years, and then keep reflecting. And at some point in time, you will have a statement of purpose that writes itself. If you're in a situation where you're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, probably not the right decision.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we've got about 5 minutes left. I definitely want to invite people to continue serving up any questions because there are a couple more I want to get through. But obviously, as questions come up, we definitely want to address them. So one is, were there any specific experiences, whether inside the classroom or outside the classroom, or for Rob, it might have been at Dunbar's, but any particular moments or experiences that actually had a real tangible impact on either the direction you went in, or just something that has helped propel you, something that you learned a big lesson from? Any experiences? Again, it doesn't have to be a class or a professor. It might be a class project or an extracurricular thing. But anytime during your school years, especially at Cornell, that kind of had an impact on you.
I'd say for me, I mean, I think I mentioned this before, was when that fateful semester abroad, where I just got exposure to what other possible career opportunities there would be, and then just making the decision to, before I committed myself to one path, try out another and see what happens. I never would have guessed that it would really have I would have just kept on that path. But it was the notion, I think, of trying different things, not just focusing on one area of study in school, I think is really important.
Yeah. What do you think, Rob? Was there just something memorable that kind of impacted you? Not even I use this in my job, but just something that shaped you?
I'll give an interesting one from law school, actually. And in law school, I had a constitutional law professor. I wound up taking a civil liberties clinic law class with him, and it turned out that class wasn't exactly what I hoped or expected it would be, and I didn't really put in much energy into that class. And at graduation, actually in cap and gown, the professor caught up with me because I had done well in constitutional law, but he was notably and understandably disappointed with my efforts third year of law school in his second class. And he pulled me aside and he sort of gave me direct feedback. And he said, you could have done better. You could have worked harder. I'm giving you a gentleman's C for the semester. And at that point in time, I obviously, like every 23, 24-year-old, it's difficult to digest that. But it was very helpful for me to think about how I would manage my career, because I would say, you can't get away with shortcuts and not working hard on any assignment, or in this case, any class. And, whereas you could get away with it, so to speak, in a lower grade in a class, you can't get away with it in the work world. If people catch on to the notion that your work ethic is subpar, or you're not, putting in your efforts and energies into a team, that plays itself out in with more stakes in a career. And so I was able to process that, and he was right. And, I've never gone back to my career and told him that, but he'd be happy to know that I learned something from it nonetheless.
Nice. All right, so we're going lightning round. And Bharath, I want to start with you. We have a last question from Eitan Wolf. What was the most difficult part of your professional career? Was there a moment where you're oh, this is so difficult? And it could have been where something failed and you learned, or something where you almost failed and you succeeded. And by the way, it's okay if you want to share about when you got fired. I've been fired twice in my career. Don't tell anybody. But there, I just said it. But Bharath, difficult challenge.
Yeah, I think there are many of those. You're never going to learn until you stumble your toes. But I think looking back, if I think about what is the most difficult thing in my career, is that there are those opportunities where I've let go, where I could have definitely spent more time in a role or a company, because the thing with the tech industry in general, and entertainment and tech in particular, it's a very volatile combustible combination, because there's so much going on. the industry around you changes so often. It's everything is the new shiny glamorous thing in front of you. So I think when I look back, the most difficult thing is knowing and having the sort of the wisdom of your past experience or what have you to know how much time, what success actually looks like, which is less about 6 months or 1 year or 2 years in a role, and really knowing what those benchmarks for what really good looks like. I think when you work in a very exciting area or an industry like that, that becomes a little hard. That's just been my experience.
Yeah. All right, awesome. So last thing, and by the way, there was a question from Woody Peak. Are there any online groups, media clubs? There's all sorts of stuff at Cornell. There's also a LinkedIn group called the Cornell ILRAA Sports and Entertainment Execs. So if you just Google Cornell or go onto LinkedIn, Cornell ILRAA Sports and Entertainment Execs, you'll see we have a LinkedIn group, and I'm the guy who accepts or rejects people, but I'll accept all of you. Speed round, I want like 10 seconds. What's your advice for a Cornell student? What is that one little nugget you want to share? Could be funny, could be serious, could be life-changing. This is because we're just up out of time. Who's got a little piece of advice? Besides wear your mask.
I mean, it's hard to say this now, I guess, because I don't know what it's like to be an undergrad remotely, but just like enjoy every moment of it. Enjoy it.
Like that. Yep. At Dunbar's, preferably. Rob, what's your thought? What's a little advice?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I think everybody wants to sort of speed up into their careers, and I would say if you have the opportunity to sort of enjoy it, as well as Meredith pointed out, traveling is a good thing. Having a sense, whether of living in the city other than you grew up in or living internationally, I found it very helpful living in California and also traveling a bit internationally with the Olympics. Getting a sense of what other people are like and their perspectives is really helpful to shape who you are and have a better understanding of the people around you.
Bharath, what's your little advice for students?
Well, not having good grades because you've been binging is not a spiffy opener to get a job in these companies. So just leave it with all of that.
Got it. So last thing I'll say is, hey, you guys, if you're graduating from Cornell, and I think some of you who are about to graduate, you're good enough. If you can get through Cornell, you could hang with anybody. Just trust me on this. I've worked for a lot of different companies. You can hang with anybody. So, be confident in your abilities, have fun, live a balanced life. You got your whole career to have a career. So while you're in school, actually enjoy being a student. You don't have to be a mini professional. So first of all, I want to thank Meredith, Bharath, Rob for joining me. Love this conversation. These are great people. And we are full of great people in the Cornell ILR Alumni Association, Hugh Meck, Meredith, I think as president of the ILR Alumni Association, I have the full power vested in me to make you an honorary ILRE. You just have to figure out who Samuel Gompers is, Cigar Rollers Union and founder of AFL. But thank you so much. I'm looking forward to people getting involved with the ILR Alumni Association in Cornell going forward. It's been a real privilege. Thank you. Everybody be safe and best of luck to you. Take care.
Thank you.
This has been a production of the ILR School at Cornell University. ILR, shaping the next 75 years of work.